Hello! It's been a really long time and I'm actually now recording at work on my brand new GoPro, which I bought because I want to do more snorkeling and diving and stuff. I want to be able to take pictures and videos underwater, and underwater disposable cameras just aren't very good. Anyway, not the point. Today I was planning on filming myself in the shaker because I got back on the shaker yesterday for the first time in 2.5 weeks, but it broke at the end of the day, so I'm back on irrigation. So I'm doing something called a pressure bomb. That it measures how much water is in the leaves, and it does this by pushing nitrogen gas through them. But before you can put the leaf into the machine that does that, you have to wait for 15 minutes while they sit in a little metal bag on the tree. I've got 3 days left of my 88 days, and all 88 of those days have been on this same almond farm in New South Wales. And I've done irrigation for most of that with some shaking as well during the harvest time. But I've only done shaking really for about, I think, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks altogether. So not that much. Most of it has been on irrigation. So today I actually wanted to sit and talk about the pros and cons of farm work, since I've got some time, 15 minutes, while these leaves do their thing on the tree. And so I wrote down my pros and cons, and so I want to start with the cons first and then end with the pros, because I do think that this experience overall has been really, really positive. So I want to end on a positive note instead of ending on a negative note. So I'm going to start with my con list. Hello. So 2 things really quickly. 1, yes, my hair is very dark purple now and I love it. 2, I wanted to add just a little note here. So I was editing this video, and in a video I posted previously about my time at farm work, I say that my coworkers are really lovely. And I just want to say that that is mostly true. Like Mick, who I live with his family, they are amazing, really lovely people, and he is awesome, and he's really looked out for me during my time here in Hillston. And then the other backpackers are great as well. They've been really, really good the entire time that I've been here. It's just that other people can be difficult to get along with, and I get along with them because they are my coworkers and I have to work there every day. But I don't want you to think that I was either lying when I said that they were lovely before, or that I've suddenly changed my mind. It's just, I think they got more comfortable with me, so they let their guard down a little bit and maybe let their true colors show. And then also I think as well, it just became something that it wasn't one comment that I could maybe let slide because it was one comment. It became obvious that it was a pattern. So yesterday I actually filmed this video, pros and cons of farm work, and I really like the way the pros part turned out, but I don't like the way the cons part turned out. So I'm going to be re-filming that bit, which is why I'm in a different outfit, and while I'm doing it I'm going to be cutting joiners out of pipes. That way I am continuing to work while I do it, because I don't have to do the pressure bombs today. And it's 4 o'clock and it's very, very hot, so I'm sitting in the shade while I do this. So the cons of farm work, mainly it's really just 2 things. The first con is the job itself, and that might sound like a big one, but I think what you have to keep in mind is that you're doing a job that you may never have done before. Like, I know I had never worked with almonds before. In fact, I'd never really done physical labor before. So that's something to keep in mind. So that's obviously difficult. And then the other thing as well is that it's really just like kind of monotonous and boring. Like, you do the same thing over and over and over again, at least with the job that I worked, because I was doing irrigation and then shaking a little bit. But so irrigation, you're looking at the pipes all the time. Anyway, what I was saying was that the job just gets kind of monotonous because you're driving up and down rows looking for leaks basically constantly. So after a while that does get really, really boring. I just think that's part of working though sometimes, right? Like, no matter what your job is, sometimes it gets boring. So that's really not that big of a deal. So that's the first con. It was, for me, the job itself. It was monotonous and got a little boring. But other than that, the job itself really isn't so bad. It could be very difficult at times, like physically strenuous, and you're out in the sun and the heat, you know, because I worked it during Australia's summer. So it definitely got hot, but that's really not the end of the world. Now, the bigger con is the town itself. So Hillston is a small town of about 1,400 people approximately. But the main difference between a town of 1,400 people in Australia and a town of 1,400 people in the United States is that in the United States, there are things nearby. So like, well, not always, but in my experiences, because, you know, I'm just going based off what I've been through while I've been here. Like, Riley was from a town of a similar size, but in Indiana, obviously, not Australia. And his graduating class in high school was, I think, about 280 people. So like a pretty sizable graduating class. Nothing to like turn your nose up at. Bigger than my graduating class, but I went to private school. But that's because the school took kids from towns nearby as well, not just his town. Well, the graduating class of my friend Simon, who is only a year older than me, so he would have been a year ahead of me in school, who I've met here, he's a local, his graduating class was 11. That's it. And he was the only boy. So I think that that's something kind of to put it in perspective, is that even though it's this, like, to kind of put it in perspective, it's a small town, but there's nothing else nearby. Like, the nearest town that really has anything in it is an hour away. And the grocery store here is only open until 5:30, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday. Thursdays it's open till 7, and then on Saturdays and Sundays it's only open until noon. So if you're like me and you're working a physical labor job, especially a farming job, it's never open when you're home, except Thursdays for about an hour. So I used to have to get other people to do my shopping and stuff for me when I needed food, or I'd have to go on Thursdays or wake up early on Saturday and Sunday if I wasn't working, which a lot of the time I was. So it was just a pain in the butt, really. And the grocery store doesn't have that much stuff, and it's more expensive, and it just, yeah, it's a pain. Now, though, I live with a family, and so they do all the grocery shopping, which is really nice. Yeah, so the town is a con, but it's not just like, you know, that it's small or that it's rural. It's also that it comes with the bad things of living in a small town, which are things like people knowing everybody's business, which is something that I've never liked. It's why I didn't really like going to a small high school, because I felt like everybody knew everybody's business. But after speaking with old classmates, apparently that was so not the case, and it was just that that's how it felt. So maybe it's similar now. Maybe I feel like everybody knows everybody's business, and really they don't. But for some reason it feels a little bit more true here, because I just think that unfortunately when you live in a small town, you know, everyone knows everyone, and you've known everyone for so long as well, that you just, I don't know, it just, yeah, there's a lot of gossip that goes on, which is not my favorite thing in the entire world, really. And there's also a very bad mentality here of us versus them when it comes to backpackers versus locals. And I don't think the backpackers are honestly to blame for that particular thing. I know I'm probably a little biased because I am one, but I feel like the backpackers I know really don't have any issue with locals or anything. We're very happy to, I mean, I live with some, so clearly I don't really care. I'm friends with some as well, like Simon, and a lot of my backpacker friends are the same way. But for some reason, the locals seem to have a problem with backpackers. And you hear a lot of my coworkers will say things like, oh, I don't go to this pub, which, side note, there are 2 in town, so I don't really know how you can just rule out half the nightlife. But they'll say that they aren't going to one pub because the backpackers are going to be there, and they hate them, which is a really strong word, I think. So there's that. And I think some of that animosity comes from the fact that we do take jobs from locals, but at the same time, that's not really our fault, because the Australian government has put in place that we have to do this. If it weren't for the 88 days, I wouldn't be doing this job, which, you know, take as you will. But I think that it's not really our fault that the Australian government has said that we have to do this. So you shouldn't take it out on us when it's required for us to work these jobs for 3 months or whatever. And also, I had jobs in Melbourne that I applied for that said, oh, we're only interested in locals because we want someone long term. But that doesn't happen here for the jobs that we're working. It's, you know, there's only one local on irrigation here. And everyone else is a backpacker. Or I had friends that worked in the potato shed, and a lot of the potato graders are backpackers. So there are jobs that some farms just leave for backpackers because they're the shit kicker jobs, to be perfectly honest. Like, nobody wants to work irrigation. The locals complain if they have to work irrigation. So I don't really understand that. I mean, I do, obviously, because they're taking jobs from people who might want them, but that's not our fault. So that's part of the animosity. I think the other part of the animosity, unfortunately, comes from the fact that the men in the town really seem to enjoy the fact that there is a fresh group of young women under 30, that come in every few months, stay for a while, and then leave. Because I know that a lot of the local women kind of think that the backpacker girls are like out to get their husbands, which they aren't, as far as I know. I mean, I'm definitely not, and none of my friends at the backpackers at the hostel have ever shown any interest in any local boy at all, and especially not the ones that are married or taken or whatever. But I think, unfortunately, the interest is really one-sided, and it's really the men that are interested in the backpacker girls because, you know, they're cute, they're young, they're traveling, they're exotic, etc. And so I think there's like this tension between the women of the town and the backpacker women, because it's seen as like, oh, you're gonna take my husband, which I don't want your husband. I don't want your boyfriend. I want nothing to do with anyone who's taken. So I think that's also where part of the animosity comes from, is that feeling of like, oh, they're gonna, like, backpacker girls are sluts, like, they're gonna sleep with our men, etc. And I've heard people say things like that because the locals here seem to really like me, which makes my life a whole lot easier. But it was also really frustrating to hear them talk about my friends like that. Which brings me to another point. One of the cons is a combination of the town and the job. And that is that because it's a small town and because everybody knows everybody, everybody I work with knows everybody and knows each other really well and knows everyone else, and etc., etc., etc. So if something happens, everybody hears about it right away, even if it's not what they think. And because it's a small town, unfortunately, it has taken a little longer for them to catch up on common times. So there is quite a bit of misogyny at work, and there is quite a bit of racism at work. There are no people of color that work with us except for 2 Indian men, and then they've hired a lot of men from the Kingdom of Tonga for harvest. Now, I have heard people here use the N-word more times than I've ever heard anyone in the United States use it, because I've never heard anyone in the United States use it, not in the way that they are. I've had friends who are African American use it when talking to each other, but none of my white friends have ever said it. But I've had white people here say it, and when I expressed my displeasure with the fact that they had just used that word and corrected them and said, you really shouldn't say that, I was met with a reaction of, well, I wouldn't say it to a black person in America, which is interesting to me that they understand that it's not good, but yet they'll still say it. There's just the blatant racism towards the Tongans, which is really upsetting. We had a barbecue because a coworker was retiring, and they purposefully called the Tongans to lunch after all of the other people had eaten. And their excuse is that it's because the Tongan men eat a lot and they want to make sure that everyone else has their fill. But then why not just buy enough food for everybody to eat? I don't really understand why you have to treat them like a second-class citizen. And then there are things like, I've had coworkers say to me that it's always better to hire either a pretty face or someone who's nice and hardworking. Like, if you're gonna hire someone, you have to do one of those two. And I just think that that's not okay. And there's a double standard as well for men and women in what they wear. Like, we were told that we had to wear long shorts because it's sun protection, which, fair enough. It's really sunny in New South Wales, and sunburn is a problem, and etc. I get that. But when the man who wears really short shorts was reminded of this rule, he said that he would rather lose his job than wear long shorts. And the girls were told to stop dressing like we were trying to have sex with everyone, which is not even why the rule exists. The rule exists because of sun protection. And also, none of the girls wear shorts that I would deem as inappropriate to work in. I know that I'm not objective, but I just think no one was wearing clothing that I thought, wow, that's really, really inappropriate. They're just shorts. They're shorts that you're wearing because it's hot outside and you need to be able to move around. But there's a double standard. And then the last con that has to do with a mixture of the town and the job is that there's not a very good understanding of what is appropriate and not appropriate to say at work. And I think that, unfortunately, that stems from everyone knowing each other really well, and so they think that there's no such thing as being inappropriate at work because you know everybody really well. But I think in particular, because you've got a group of people that are not used to what you're saying there, you might have to be slightly more sensitive to the fact that some of the things you're saying are not workplace appropriate. But if you try to express that things aren't workplace appropriate, like I have a few times, I've expressed maybe that wasn't okay to say, or that I don't think what they've said is funny, you very quickly get accused of not being able to take a joke or taking everything too seriously. And I've definitely been told that, ooh, did you see that? And I've definitely been told that Americans don't know how to take a joke. It's just one of those things that when you are an outsider coming into a small town, you definitely end up being the butt of the joke sometimes, and that can be really hard. And I think I'm really lucky because I'm a native English speaker, but some of the people that are not definitely have a harder time because they get very frustrated if you don't understand them. They get frustrated if you don't speak the language when you're around your friends that also speak something other than English. Like, they get really mad about that. Yeah, you should be able to understand the directions that someone's giving you, but if you're with your friend at lunch and you want to speak French, speak French. I don't care. I don't know why anybody else does. But I think when you are an outsider coming into a small town, it's very difficult. And I think that's really the biggest con, is that when you're working farm work, you're always going to be a stranger coming into a small town, and there are going to be people that are uncomfortable with that, especially if you don't speak English as a first language. Even I, who speak English as a first language, and a lot of people I think would assume that Australia and the United States culturally are pretty similar, which they are in a lot of senses, but they're also very different in a lot of senses. I still experience this feeling of being an outsider and sometimes feeling like I don't quite fit in. But that's not necessarily a bad thing in my opinion. I also think that outsiders are viewed as a threat, which is a shame. Anyway, that's a more detailed version of the cons list, and I'm really glad that I talked it out because I think I just needed to talk about it. And also I think it's important, in case anyone else is doing a working holiday year, to be aware of those issues. And also, please don't be afraid to speak up if you're being sexually harassed by a farmer. It's really, really not okay. They know they're in a position of power over you because you need the 88 days. And, you know, if you don't speak English or you're not familiar with Australian law, they really can take advantage. There was a farmer in Queensland just arrested for it. So please, 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 if your boss in any field is sexually harassing you, I know it's scary because you can lose your job if you say something, but please try to find someone to say something to. Okay, on to the pause. So as I said, I think overall this experience has been a really positive one. And I want to talk a little bit more about the pros in general. So the first pro is the job itself. I did a job that I never would have done before. I never would have worked on a farm unless the Australian government told me that I had to in order to stay for a second year. So that's been really cool. It's something that I've done that I never would have before. The next has to do with the location. So I never would have visited Hillston in New South Wales if it wasn't for this job and farm work. So that was really cool to get to see a part of Australia that I wouldn't have normally, and to immerse myself into rural Australian culture when otherwise I probably wouldn't have done that, because I really would have stayed in the cities and then gone and done the touristy things in rural areas without really immersing myself into a rural community. I've lived in cities or suburbs my whole life, so it was really interesting to just see a different way of life. Another pro is that I saved up a lot of money while I was here, which is why I can go to Vietnam for so long. So that's really good. And then the last pro that doesn't involve me rambling a lot is that I loved the sense of community that was amongst the backpackers. So I lived at the backpackers for a while. I lived there for the entirety of my time here in like November, December, and then for like maybe 2/3 of my time here, this time from January to March. Actually, a few weeks ago, now, I guess it was a month ago, I moved in with one of my coworkers. He has a missus and 2 children, and so I moved in with them. I live in their spare room, and it's really nice. It's way more affordable, and I get dinner every night, which is really cool. But I love the feeling of camaraderie amongst the backpackers. Like, it's this feeling of like, we're all doing this thing that we have to do in order to get a visa to stay for a second year, or we're here to save money or whatever, but we're very much all together, and I really, really enjoy that. Because even though I don't live there anymore, I'm still very welcomed, and people are still really lovely, which is nice. Because sometimes when you leave a hostel, there's that feeling of like, oh, you've abandoned us, but they don't feel you that way, or make you feel that way. So the second one is going now. So I've just taken a little break, had to drive to another part of the farm, and now I'm back. So the last pro is a big one. It's more of just a reflection on my time during farm work. I think better than a pro, but it's very positive, which is why I wanted to save it for last. Essentially, overall, I'm very, very grateful for the experience. Even though now, after 88 days, I'm ready to move on, there was a period of time where I thought maybe I would stay until the end of harvest, which is end of April, early May, but I've decided not to do that anymore just because I'm ready to move on. You know, the job is pretty monotonous and boring, and I'm not shaking as much as I originally was going to be, which was why I was going to stay until the end of harvest, was to be a shaker. But now that's not happening as much because of some almond harvest stuff. And so I've just decided it's time to move on. Even though eventually I would be put back on the shaker more consistently, it's just time. It's time to just move on. And after, 88 days of this and of living in a small town, I've appreciated my time, but I didn't come to Australia to work on an almond farm and do this. I came to Australia to explore and travel and do what I wanted to do. And even though I'm really grateful for the experience, I'm ready to move on. Anyway, musings about the experience in general. Like I said, overall, very positive. Definitely some negatives. Like I said, boring job, long hours. Also, a decent amount of misogyny. I got groped a number of times in the pub and stuff in town. So even though those things were the negatives, I think overall this has been a really good experience because I never would have done something like this unless the Australian government told me I had to get a second year. And then also it's really opened my eyes to something that I haven't really thought about very much before, and that is where my food comes from, which sounds really silly, but it's true. Like, growing up in the suburbs and then in London, we would just go to the grocery store and buy what we needed, and it was never really an issue. And even though Riley is from a rural area, his dad is a factory worker, and their factory makes grain silos and pig troughs and stuff. So nothing that humans use, nothing that I really think about that much. Here, doing this, it's really made me think about where my food comes from, which sounds really weird because why wouldn't I think about it before? I'm 25, but I think it's just put it in a different perspective. I think about all the work that goes into growing these almonds, and I'm really lucky because the almond farms pay like pretty well, but I have friends that pick oranges and they can make $40 in a day. That's 40 Australian dollars in a day. When you buy almonds, you say things like, oh, they're expensive, and sometimes people don't even buy oranges because they're too expensive here. But then you think about how much people are being paid who are picking the oranges, and you're like, wow. The other thing it's really made me think a lot about is how much waste farms have. Just because here, they literally take all of the garbage, put it in a big hole, and then burn it and bury it, which can't be a good way to handle garbage, but I don't know enough about it to say if it is or not. But I'm gonna guess it's not, or how many animals get killed on the farm, even though it's an almond farm. They shoot lots of pests and stuff, and here things like kangaroos and emus are considered pests. So they'll shoot those too. So it's just kind of interesting to think about where the food's coming from and to be a part of where someone's food is coming from. And to just kind of put it in perspective and think about everything that I consume, both food and not, someone's had to make or grow, which I knew beforehand. But because I've never been the person doing that process, I don't think I appreciated it as much before. So I think this has just been a really positive experience because it's opened my eyes to something that otherwise I really wouldn't have spent that much time thinking about, which makes me realize that I'm very lucky, I'm very privileged to live a life like that. I'm very grateful that I've kind of realized that even more so than I already knew. I already knew I was lucky. Not everybody at 24 can decide they're going to move to Australia and do it, and I get that. But I think this experience has just reaffirmed how lucky I am, I think. and it's been really positive, even with the negative things thrown in. So that's my overall thoughts on farm work. Basically, there was bad stuff, but overall was worth it, and I would absolutely do it again. You know, I thought a lot about, did I do it at the wrong time? Should I have done it when I first got to Australia? Blah, 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 blah. But I think my first year in Australia, because it is coming to an end, I'm filming this on March 20th, and my last day for my first year ends April 6th, but I'll actually be in Vietnam the night of the 4th. Those are my thoughts on farm work. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you have any questions about farm work or the visa or anything, please feel free to ask. Leave comments down below or like or whatever. I don't know if anybody other than my mom and Riley watches these anyway, so hi guys. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.